Late afternoon, traffic hell, and my patience at its lowest possible level. All I wanted to do was park, sort out my life, and leave. I found a perfect parking space in a residential street, right in front of the house of one of those madams who seem to have been born to boss people around. It wasn't a reserved space, nor did it have a sign saying it was forbidden. It was just a public street, like any other. But it seems that some people think that their street comes with a signed deed. I parked the car, turned off the engine, and was just getting my things when I heard a tapping on the window. Guess what? A blonde woman with huge sunglasses, a face like she's not very friendly, and that typical beige dress that looks like the uniform of unbearable people. She stared at me as if I had parked inside her dining room. I opened the window just enough to hear what she wanted, because my instinct was telling me that this was going to be difficult.
You can't park here.
Simple as that. No hello, no excuse me. Just a dry order, said in a voice that made it clear she was used to being obeyed. I looked around, just to make sure I hadn't made a mistake. There were no no-go signs, no yellow stripes, nothing to indicate that the parking space had an owner. Just an ordinary piece of street, like any other in the city. Why? I asked, without hiding my tone of boredom. She crossed her arms, as if the answer was obvious.
Because that parking space is for residents of the neighborhood. You don't live here.
Now, mind you, if there was some kind of rule saying that, fine. But it was a public street, which meant that anyone with a car and a modicum of common sense could stop there. I took a deep breath, already feeling the headache coming on. She took a step back and pointed at the house behind her, as if that gesture explained everything, as if the fact that she lived on the street gave her exclusive rights over the piece of asphalt in front of her. I already knew that people like that existed, but seeing them in person was a completely different experience. She continued to stand there, waiting for me to simply turn around and walk away, as if she were doing me a favor by warning me about her imaginary rule. But I'm not one to make life easy for people who think they can run the world, so I made a point of getting out of the car as calmly as I could and locking the door right in her face. Her look of indignation was worth gold, and I already knew that this was far from over. The sound of my car door locking was like a burst of fireworks in that woman's head. She took a step back, gasping, as if I had committed a blasphemy in front of her. She really believed that all she had to do was give me an order, and I'd drive off, disappearing from her life forever. But, to her misfortune, I'm not the type to bow my head to that kind of person. I made a point of calmly arranging my backpack and checking the car one last time, just to prolong the moment. She was still standing there on the sidewalk, arms crossed, and looking like she'd never been contradicted in her life. But now, she was furious. She repeated, now in a louder tone. I looked around dramatically, as if trying to find some policeman or traffic warden who could confirm her words. Nothing. No authority that could prevent a simple citizen from using a public street. Then call a tow truck, I said, without bothering to look at her as I checked my cell phone. Her face turned red instantly. You could see that she was used to having the last word, giving orders and seeing people simply obey. But now, she was facing someone who didn't care about her imaginary superiority. She huffed, crossed her arms again, and tried a new attack. In her mind, the street was an extension of her backyard, as if, when she signed the contract to buy the house, the government had given her a piece of asphalt as a gift. I raised an eyebrow. So what? Your house isn't the street. The shock on her face was beautiful. She was so unresponsive for a moment that she opened and closed her mouth a few times, like a fish out of water trying to get back into the ocean. But instead of accepting defeat and walking away, she doubled down.
If you don't get out of here, I'm going to call the police.
I love it when people like her do that, when they think they can call the authorities as if they were calling the waiter at the restaurant. So I just shrugged, looked at my watch, and let go. Go ahead, but call quickly, because I have an appointment. It was then that she realized she had just dug her own grave. The woman's face was a spectacle, a mixture of shock, anger, and contained despair. She really hoped that the moment she let out the classic, "I'm calling the police," I would panic and run away like a criminal, but I just stood there, waiting. She blinked a few times, as if she was still trying to understand why I wasn't begging her to leave. But when she realized that I wasn't going to move, she huffed and pulled her cell phone out of her purse with a dramatic movement. The bus of her facial expressions continued its journey through despair. First, the confidence of someone who thinks they can solve everything with a phone call. Then, the hesitation of someone who realizes they may have overreacted, but now she couldn't back down. Because, you see, her pride was at stake. She dialed and put her cell phone to her ear. She was silent for a while, waiting for someone to answer. But then something happened. I noticed because I had my arms crossed, watching the scene as if it were a movie in the theater. Gradually, her posture changed. Her shoulders slumped a little. Her chin, once jutted out, dropped a centimeter. Her voice, once firm and bossy, came out a little uncertain.
Hi. So, there's a car parked in front of my house, and I was wondering if you could do something about it.
She remained quiet, listening to the answer on the other end of the line. And that's when the icing on the cake came, because her face went completely static. From what I could understand, the person on the other end basically explained the obvious: a public street is a public street. It wasn't forbidden to park there, and the police weren't going to waste their time with a pointless complaint. But the best part was the pathetic attempt to save her own skin. She listened a little longer, let out an interjected, "Okay," and hung up her cell phone. She looked at me with a deadly stare. But what could she do? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. And that's when the tantrum began. If there's one thing certain people can't do, it's accept defeat. But her problem wasn't just with me. It was with reality. Because for the first time in her life, no one was bending to her will. Her frustration was almost palpable. Her lips pressed tightly together, her fingers clutching her cell phone as if she wanted to crush it. It was the look of someone who has realized they've lost, but doesn't know how to get out of the situation without admitting it. She huffed, crossed her arms, and tried another approach: passive-aggressive intimidation. She stood there on the sidewalk, looking me up and down, as if she were memorizing every detail about me to use in an imaginary courtroom. She looked like the kind of person who spends all day watching Know Your Rights videos and thinks she knows more about the law than the police themselves. For a few seconds, she just mumbled things to herself, as if she were narrating her own suffering.
Nowadays, anyone can do what they want, right?
I don't know if she expected me to answer, but I made a point of ignoring her completely, because the worst punishment for someone who lives on attention is not getting any. And that's when her tantrum reached its peak. She walked over to the flower bed in front of her house and started ripping leaves off the plants, furious, as if she was transferring all her anger to an innocent bush. Then she picked up a broom and started sweeping the sidewalk as if the dust was to blame for something. It was ridiculous, but at the same time, it was fascinating. Because, you see, when a person is right, they just move on. But when you know you're wrong but don't want to admit it, you do exactly what this woman was doing. You create a scene. I could just as well have walked away and left her there in her own outburst. But now it was a matter of principle, and I made a point of not leaving any time soon. The woman was still there, pretending to be doing something useful, when I realized something funny. She didn't want to leave my car. It was as if I believed that if I stayed there long enough, I would eventually give up, as if I would tire of the silent clash and magically agree that yes, that parking space belonged to her, and yes, I should disappear from the street forever. But the problem with people like that is that they never know when to stop. I could feel her gaze burning into my back as I fiddled with my phone, pretending to be completely oblivious to the chirping going on just a few meters away. Time passed, the sun began to lower, and her frustration began to show signs of exhaustion. She had no more arguments, no support, and, worst of all for someone like her, no power over the situation. After a few more minutes, the neighbor next door came out to water the plants and looked at her with an expression of pure curiosity. It was as if she was trying to understand why this woman was standing there, holding a broom as if it were a sword in an imaginary battle. The neighbor didn't ask anything. She just carried on watering the plants, but her presence was enough to break the woman's pose, because now she had an audience, and she knew that if she carried on with her theatrics, before long the whole neighborhood would be commenting on the lady freaking out on the sidewalk because of a car that wasn't even blocking anything. So she did what any proud person would do when they realize they've lost. She pretended she never cared. She put her broom away, smoothed out her dress, took a deep breath, and started walking back to the house. But at the last moment, she turned to me and let loose, with all the arrogance she still had left in her. "Next time, have more respect." And she went into the house, slamming the door as if she had won something. I almost laughed out loud. Respect? Respect is for people who respect others. And apparently, this woman still had a lot to learn about that. Anyway, mission accomplished. The car stayed exactly where it was, and I left knowing that she would never forget that day. So, tell me, have you ever had to deal with someone like that? That person who thinks that the street, the store, or even the air we breathe belongs only to them? If you've been through something similar, let me know in the comments, because I need to know these stories. And if you like this video, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and activate the bell so you don't miss out on more content like this. Want to see more absurd shenanigans? Click on the card, and let's marathon. See you in the next video.